My name is Elena, and I'm 24. There was a time I believed I had a clear picture of who I was. I saw the world in calm shades of safety and love, and my life, though touched by loss, was wrapped in the warmth of quiet devotion. I lost my mother when I was just 5. I don't remember much about her. Not her voice, not the way her perfume smelled, not even the color of her eyes without the help of old photographs. But I remember the silence that followed her passing. It was deep and hollow, like the pause between heartbeats. And then there was Mark. He wasn't my biological father. He was my mother's oldest friend, the man who stood at her side through every hospital visit, every grim diagnosis. When she passed, he didn't disappear like the others. He stayed. Quietly. Completely. And over time, he became the center of the life we rebuilt from the wreckage. He never asked to be called Dad. But somewhere between helping me tie my shoes and waiting outside my classroom every afternoon, the name found its way to him. And he never corrected it. Our home was modest, tucked away at the end of a quiet street where the summers smelled of cut grass and old books. Mark worked as a carpenter, strong, steady, and careful. He built shelves and tables during the day and stories at night. I still remember the way his voice softened when he told me bedtime tales, his words wrapping around me like a blanket, easing me into sleep. We weren't rich. We didn't travel. But I had something rare, a childhood without fear. Mark was never one for big gestures. He loved in the quiet ways, like warming up the car before school so I wouldn't shiver, leaving a glass of water by my bed when I had a cold, sitting in silence beside me when I was too upset to talk. I didn't realize back then how much those small things mattered, how they would shape the way I came to understand love. When I turned 18, I left home for university. Everyone said it was natural, a rite of passage. But part of me felt like I was stepping off a cliff I couldn't see the bottom of. Mark hugged me tightly the morning I left. He didn't say much, just pressed a small notebook into my hands and said, "Write it all down. Every little bit. One day you'll want to remember who you were." I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. But now, 6 years later, I think I finally do. Because no matter how far I've gone or how much I've changed, that quiet house at the end of the street and the man who taught me what it meant to feel safe are still with me. And some memories, no matter how much time passes, never really fade. They wait, softly, until you're ready to return. They say the farther you go, the more you discover who you truly are. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes, in the search for yourself, you can lose pieces you never meant to let go. I still remember the first day I stepped onto campus. The sun was sharp against the concrete walkways, and the air buzzed with a kind of electric possibility. Everyone seemed to know exactly who they were, confident, loud, laughing in clusters under trees, arms slung over shoulders like the world already belonged to them. And then there was me. I dragged my suitcase through the crowd, pretending not to feel like a child in a costume. Back home, I had been someone, a daughter, a familiar presence in a small, quiet world. But here, I was just another stranger in a sea of new faces. My dorm room was small. The walls were bare, save for a single poster left by the previous occupant, faded colors, a quote I didn't understand. My roommate was friendly, worldly, and so effortlessly cool it made my stomach twist. She talked about parties and protests, late-night cafes, and spontaneous weekend trips. She belonged here. I, on the other hand, called home twice a week, once for myself and once for Mark. He never said much on the phone, just asked if I was eating well, getting enough rest, locking my windows at night. But I could hear the pause before he hung up. The way he waited, hoping I'd say something more. I didn't. I was too busy trying to become someone else. I went to parties even when I didn't feel like dancing. I drank things I couldn't pronounce. I laughed at jokes I didn't understand and said yes to people who barely knew my name. Every new experience felt like a badge of honor, proof that I was moving forward, that I wasn't the quiet girl from the quiet house anymore. But somewhere between the late nights and blurry mornings, I began to feel hollow. I'd lie awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling, wondering what Mark would think if he saw me now. Would he recognize the version of me who wore glitter on her cheeks and secrets in her smile? Would he be proud? Or would he see the sadness behind my eyes before I even noticed it was there? I didn't write in the notebook he gave me. I wasn't ready to face the truth of what I was becoming. University life was exciting, yes, but it was also disorienting. There were moments when I felt like I was drifting, untethered, unseen. No one there knew about my mother. No one knew how I still slept with the light on during thunderstorms. No one knew the way Mark used to sing off-key while fixing the kitchen sink just to make me laugh. No one knew me, and the longer I stayed, the more I started to forget myself too. Growth doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like distance, like forgetting the sound of your own name until someone from home says it aloud again, and you remember who you used to be. Sometimes, going home feels less like returning and more like facing a mirror you've been avoiding. Summer arrived without warning. Final exams passed in a blur of caffeine and sleepless nights. The campus, once teeming with noise, began to empty. My suitcase, slightly more worn now, sat at the foot of my bed, half-packed with wrinkled clothes and unopened textbooks. I told my friends I was going home to rest. The truth was I missed the silence. I missed Mark. The bus ride felt longer than it should have. Trees blurred by the window. My earbuds hummed softly, but I wasn't really listening. My fingers ran absently over the cover of the notebook he gave me months ago. Still blank. Still waiting. When the bus finally pulled into our little town, everything felt smaller, quieter, as if the world had taken a deep breath in my absence. And then I saw the house, still painted the same soft shade of blue. The porch light was off. It was still afternoon, but I imagined it glowing just like when I was a child, waiting for me after school. The mailbox still leaned slightly to one side, and the old oak tree in the front yard cast familiar shadows across the grass. My heart beat faster as I walked up the path. Not from excitement, something more complicated. Something like fear. Mark opened the door before I could knock. He looked exactly the same. Maybe a little more silver at his temples. Maybe a little deeper in the eyes. But he smiled, and in that moment, something in me exhaled. "You're early," he said, stepping aside. "You're still bad at surprises." I smiled. The inside of the house smelled like home, wood polish and fresh laundry. The couch was still draped with the same old quilt. The books on the shelf still leaned in the same crooked way. And Mark still moved like he carried everyone else's weight before his own. We talked over dinner, simple food, warm conversation. I told him about my classes, the city, the people I'd met. I left out the parts that felt too heavy. He didn't push. He never did, but he listened with that same quiet focus, that same gentleness I had forgotten the world could offer. Later that night, I lay in my old room, tracing the cracks in the ceiling I had memorized as a child. The window was cracked open, and the breeze carried in the soft rustling of summer leaves. It felt surreal, like time had waited for me here, patient, unchanged. But I hadn't stayed the same, and neither had the way I saw Mark, not in the way you might think. There was no forbidden feeling.
No boundary crossed.
Just a shift. A quiet ache in the heart when you realize someone has always been your anchor, and you never fully saw them until you drifted far enough to know what anchoring really meant. Some people raise you not with words, but with presence. With steady hands and quiet glances that say, "You're safe here." And when you return, you realize they were the home you never thanked enough. The most difficult conversations are often the ones we never speak aloud. They hang in the air, in glances and silences, asking to be felt, not said. The days pass slowly, like they wanted to be savored. Each morning, I woke to the scent of coffee and the hum of the old ceiling fan. Mark was always up before me, sitting at the kitchen table with the newspaper folded neatly and a steaming mug in hand. Some things never changed, others did. I watched him more now, not intentionally, not with purpose. It was something quieter, like watching a film you've already seen, only to realize you'd missed half the meaning the first time. His shoulders seemed broader than I remembered, not in size, but in weight. The way he paused before answering questions. The way he looked out the window, as if listening to something far away. I had left as a girl who saw him as unshakable. I had returned as a woman who saw the lines time had drawn across his face. And in that space between who I had been and who I was now, something shifted. We didn't talk about the years between us. Not directly. But we started to move closer in small ways. A longer moment at the table after breakfast. A shared walk to the garden after dinner. A smile that lingered just a second longer than usual. One afternoon, I found him fixing the old drawer in the hallway. The wood was splintered, the tracks misaligned. How many times had I watched him do this when I was little? I sat nearby, cross-legged on the floor, just watching. He looked up and raised a brow. "You're not going to help," he teased. I smiled.
No.
"I'm going to remember." He paused then, the screwdriver still in his hand. "Remember what?" "This," I said softly.
You.
"This house." The quiet. His eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker there. Not discomfort, not confusion, just knowing. The kind of knowing that lives in the heart of people who've seen each other through loss, through silence, through time. That night, as we sat in the living room, the air between us held more than just summer heat. The windows were open, and the sound of crickets sang between our words. I asked him a question I'd never had the courage to voice before. "Did you ever think about leaving?" After Mom passed, Mark turned to me slowly. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was steady. "Many times. But I couldn't. You were here." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "I didn't make it easy." "You weren't supposed to," he said. "You were grieving."
So was I.
We held each other up the only way we knew how. We sat in silence after that, a silence that wasn't empty, but full of everything we had never said and everything we finally understood. There are people who love you quietly, without expectation, without applause. They stand beside you, not to shape who you become, but to remind you of who you've always been. Some people stay with you, not because you hold on to them, but because they gave you something so real it never needed to be held at all. The summer wore on gently, like a familiar song I didn't want to end. Mornings bled into afternoons, afternoons into golden evenings, and all of it passed in quiet harmony. There were no grand events, just slow breakfasts, unspoken rituals, a feeling I hadn't known I'd been missing: belonging. And yet, with every comforting moment came the quiet reminder: this wasn't permanent. I had a life waiting for me elsewhere, a version of myself I'd been building, messy, complicated, unfinished, but still mine. Mark never said it, but I could see it in the way he lingered at the door after our evening walks, the way he asked casually when classes started again, the way he didn't look at the calendar but always knew what day it was. One night, I found him in the garage, sorting through boxes I hadn't seen in years. Old photos, childhood crafts, a faded dress I had worn to my first school play. I stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching as he held up a drawing I'd made. Two stick figures under a crooked sun, one labeled me, the other, Mark. "You kept that," I whispered. He looked over his shoulder, his voice quiet. "Of course I did." And just like that, my chest ached with gratitude and something close to grief. Not the sharp kind that comes with tragedy, the quiet kind, the kind that arrives when you realize someone has loved you completely and you can never repay them in equal measure. That night, I sat on the porch alone. The sky was clear, stars scattered like stories waiting to be told. The notebook lay in my lap, still mostly empty, the pages expectant. And I wrote, "You never asked for anything, but you gave me everything." I didn't know what I was supposed to do with that truth. How do you leave someone who never once held you back? How do you say goodbye to the home inside a person? The next morning, I told Mark I'd be heading back to the city in a few days. He nodded slowly, setting down his mug. "I figured," he said. We didn't talk much after that. Not because we were avoiding anything, but because there was nothing left to prove. The love between us didn't need words. It had always spoken in gestures, in presence, in staying, and now in knowing when to let go. Letting go isn't always walking away. Sometimes it's standing still and giving someone the space to move forward with your blessing.
No resentment. No regret.
Just quiet love. The love that lasts isn't always loud. Sometimes it speaks in silence, in space, in the room someone gave you to grow, even when it meant growing away from them. The morning I left, the sky was overcast, not stormy, just quiet. Like the world understood this wasn't a day for drama, but for something gentler, more final. My bags were packed neatly by the door. The same door I had entered through weeks earlier, uncertain of who I had become. Now I stood in front of it again, not with answers, but with peace. Mark helped me load the car in silence. We didn't need to talk. The words had already been exchanged, in moments shared, in looks held a little too long, in every meal eaten side by side.
I turned to him one last time.
He gave me that soft, steady smile, the one I'd known since I was 5. The one that had comforted me after nightmares and cheered me through scraped knees and math tests.
"Thank you," I said.
His eyes didn't waver. "For what?" "For staying," I whispered. He looked away then, just for a moment. It wasn't a hard choice. I wanted to hug him tightly, the way I had as a child, but I didn't. Something about the moment asked for stillness, for reverence. So instead, I placed the small notebook in his hand, the one he gave me years ago, now filled with pages of stories, thoughts, memories. "I think you should read it," I said. When you're ready. He nodded, and then I left. The road back to the city felt different this time. I wasn't running toward anything or away. I was simply moving forward with a steadier heart and the quiet knowledge that I carried more than just clothes and books with me. I carried the shape of a man's kindness. I carried the stillness of a house that gave me space to become. I carried a kind of love that didn't ask to be named. And even now, on my busiest days, when the city roars and the past feels like another life, I still remember the sound of Mark's voice, the weight of his silence, the strength of his presence. Somewhere deep inside me, that summer hums quietly, a reminder of who I was, who I became, and the person who stood in the gap when the world broke apart. The most lasting kind of love doesn't demand. It doesn't bind. It just remains. In the quiet, in the background, in every version of you that ever dared to return home. Thank you for listening. This story was written to honor the quiet, often unseen forms of love that shape us. It is entirely fictional and meant for thoughtful reflection only.